Hello and welcome to another Why Live. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully we can, learn something together on this journey. Today, I wanted to read a little bit from John 1, because 2 months ago we talked about the creation narrative found in Genesis and kind of compared it and contrasted it to the cosmology of the Babylonian epic. And we saw the ways that they fed into each other and informed each other and gained some greater knowledge. So I wanted to look into John 1 because it's actually another creation narrative. It's not one that we typically think of because it's all the way in the New Testament and it's even the last gospel. But I wanted to take a look at this John narrative, this creation story, and compare it kind of to our other gospels and how this beginning kind of informs what we think of Jesus. We will, if you want to read along, it's going to be John 1 verses 1 through 18, and I'll read it aloud so we can follow it together. It says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave the power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, 'This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is only the Son, himself God, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known.'" So very poetic and beautifully written. All of John is kind of written in this way, flowery language and very visual. So we can contrast this with Matthew, the first gospel that we find in our New Testament. Matthew starts with a genealogy. It is a way to state that Jesus was here. He was a man, he lived, and he is divine. In Matthew's genealogy, Jesus has an absolute incredible pedigree. We find people like Abraham, Isaac, Ruth, Boaz, David, and Amos. This genealogy is filled with prophets, priests, and pillars of the Jewish faith, society, and ancestry. This is a birth of cosmic proportions where a new light starts shining in the sky, bringing world leaders to this toddler child, bearing gifts and praising his name. Matthew speaks this way and is starting from a place of Jesus being a human. And Matthew wants to highlight the ways that Jesus was divine. It matters. Jesus matters. His life story matters because he was God. We then go to Mark, where there's absolutely no time and we have to hurry and we have to get to the next thing. We're diving right into John the Baptist so that we can get straight to Jesus' ministry, and the whole time we're walking along the way to Jerusalem towards Jesus' death and resurrection. Jesus is moving The most common phrase spoken in Mark is, and then. Jesus went, and then. Jesus said, and then. The disciples wondered, and then. And then, and then, and then. Mark is marching us closer and closer towards this death and resurrection of Jesus. This is what is most important. Jesus is a little mysterious, hard to understand at times, but it's his death, his sacrifice, this atonement of sins that Mark is really honing in on. In Luke, we get another genealogy. Contrasting this to Matthew, it's kind of just a bunch of names. But what's important to Luke is that Jesus was divine, and we're starting from this place. So we need to show how Jesus is also human, how he was a man who lived like any other man, born of people that we don't remember, but he lived. He experienced life. He was a physician. He was a teacher. He lived life with the disciples. And Luke's big thing is that it's only half the story. Because originally it was Luke and it was Acts as one singular book that we then later split apart. Because Luke wanted to focus on this human life of Jesus, and that this divine being could be a man, could give the teachings and have a ministry that Jesus had. And then we need to look at the response. We need to know what the church was going to do in light of this revelation of Christ. So then we have John again, which starts with a creation narrative that Jesus has been here from the beginning. It is poetic and it is beautiful, and many theologians have gone through all four Gospels, and you can even find the sentences and the stories that they think this is probably very historically accurate. This is probably real words that Jesus said, and almost none of that is found in John. And yet, it's still within our Bible. It's still canon, because it is almost this culmination of the other three, where Jesus is ethereal, where you're not quite sure if you were to reach out, would you actually touch him? Jesus is mysterious, but he's also divine, and he's human, and it wraps up this whole thing, this whole being of Christ into this poetic, flowery wording. And I wanted to bring this all up. One, because I get to choose what I want to talk about, and I found this interesting. But also to highlight just the dynamic nature of Christ. I mean, if we think about our own story, think about if someone were to write your story down. What would it sound like if it was your mom or your dad or your brother, your siblings, a best friend, a coworker, your boss, someone maybe who works under you, and just how different those stories would sound compared to even a historian, a professional who's really just excited to learn about your life. Your parents, might focus on your younger life, your child's self, and what it was like to raise you. A friend might really highlight a wedding or a night where you just watched movies and ate ice cream together. None of these stories, these perspectives, are inherently better than the other, but they certainly would highlight differences about you and your personality and your likes and dislikes and what you like to do. So John's narrative highlights this divine, eternal nature of Christ. That Jesus wasn't just some later plan or concept by God, but he was there from the beginning, before the beginning. When all things were created, they were created through Christ Jesus, apart and one with God. And it is through, as John points out, it's through this life and this ministry, this human, earthly realm of Jesus, that we see some of our clearest vision of who God is. Someone who reached out to the fringes of society we get to see all the ways that Jesus spoke, acted, reached out to the downtrodden, and the ways he came upon opposition. We see the ways that it's kind of odd, because if we take this from an outside perspective, or we place ourselves in the context of an Israelite 2,000 years ago, You're living under Roman occupation where the religion is a pantheon. It was not uncommon to hear of human-God hybrids walking amongst humanity. And it's at this point where I think I have a lot of empathy for the Pharisees. They can get a really bad rap because in our Gospels, they're constantly pushing Jesus. They're not believing the message. But that was their job. We have to remember that the Israelites knew that a Messiah was coming. So they were open to this idea of God coming to earth in a grand way, creating this heaven on earth kingdom, but they had to do their due diligence. They, again, were living under this Roman pantheon. And so they were going to be extremely skeptic of someone coming and claiming to be the God that they know and they love, with a different twist on their traditions than they were used to. And it is this critique from the Pharisees that actually gives me a lot of hope, a lot of truth and validity to the faith that we share, because it was some of these Pharisees that turned. They interacted with Jesus. They spoke to him on a very real level. They poked and prodded and tried to find holes in Jesus' ministry, and were found lacking within themselves. They knew their tradition in and out, written on the palms of their hands and on their hearts. They knew the truth, and they found it in Jesus. This is the story of Paul, as a Pharisee who knew the law and criticized and actually fought against the early church, becomes one of the most prolific writers of the early church. My hope for you today is that as we think of this third creation narrative, as we think about the differences amongst the Gospels and this prism view of Christ, I hope that you can find it comforting rather than scary. I hope that as the things of this world, as your own life might crumble and fall away, that you can fall back and rely on a God who planned a lot from the beginning, a messianic figure who was there from the dawn of creation, a God that is constant and unwavering in his actions towards our good. So I hope you find comfort in that today. I hope you are a little bit more interested in the life and ministry of Jesus. And I hope that you are able to walk forward in this day, appreciating more and more of what the Pharisees did and the words that we have written down in our Bible. Thank you for listening, and always remember that God is fighting for you, loves you, and wants nothing but your good. That's all I got. Thank you.